Welcome to this episode of the Personal Development Podcast with Paola Castro and Michael J. Emery.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 1 of the Personal Development Podcast. I am Paola Castro. I'm a coach, an author, a speaker, and I am so thrilled to be here with you.
I'm Michael Emery. I'm also a coach, and I create a variety of different audio programs that are in the personal development and professional development niche. So
awesome.
We're starting out a podcast today, and we aren't quite sure where it's going to take us, but it's going to be a lot of fun. And Paola is going to share a brief overview of her personal development journey and path, and then I'll share some of my experiences.
Yeah. So we have chosen the topic of the personal development path. What is the personal development path and how do we navigate it? And I know for me, it started at a very young age with a lot of curiosity as a child, asking questions, questioning authority, questioning religion, and not getting the answers that I was seeking, but not really knowing why I was questioning. I just knew in my heart that there was something off. And then as I got older, I kept asking the questions and getting into following what everyone was doing, but knowing that there was a void and then there was an emptiness in my heart. And around 20 years old, I started reading and, finding more information and feeding my mind with information I've never heard before from, my heroes, my parents or the school system. And that really opened up my mind, and different things happen in life like everyone's. Little dark nights of the soul where I was finding new information and I knew I couldn't follow what I was learning anymore. I couldn't be what I learned in the past, and what I was learning, I didn't know how to apply it. So that gap in between there, brought some moments of pain, but I think it's been one of the most rewarding paths. Maybe not the most traveled road, but one of the most rewarding. And so, yeah, that's been for me. And that's why today we've decided to talk about this. And Mike has some really good information about the fundamentals that, hundreds of years ago, some thinkers were already talking about this, but for their time it was kind of early. And so I'm always fascinated what Mike brings, like the fundamentals and how was described before this time. Now in this new age, there's so many ways to describe it. But so what do you say, Mike? What was your path, and if you can talk a little bit about the fundamentals?
Sure. I was actually going to ask you, what was one of those painful wake-up experiences when you realized that what you were doing wasn't working, or it wasn't going to get you to the ideal lifestyle, the ideal experiences that you had in mind? Do you recall one of those moments?
Oh, yeah. Well, the first thing that is coming to mind is being around 23, 24 years old, fresh out of college, and ready to, engage in the corporate world and do what I'm supposed to do, to be, a business administrator, and not finding work in what I wanted, and then finding some jobs and not really feeling like I belong, like I would fit in, not having the passion to go to work every day, or just, being very confused. I remember the confusion around it. Like, I went through 4 years of college, thought that this was going to be the answer, that the next thing was to get a good job, good money, and then, get married, have a house, have kids, and that's it. Mm-hmm. But then I remember, like, as I was going to these jobs, finally when I found some jobs in the corporate world, just feeling completely unfulfilled and empty and bored to death, and trying to find ways of how to entertain myself, and they will give me a little bit of entertainment, like going out or going shopping or going here and there, but not really feeling that it was what my soul wanted. So, I had to make really difficult decisions, say, I don't want this. I want to live somewhere else. I don't want to be, in certain relationships. I want to break free, but I didn't know what free meant. So it was a lot of confusion. And I think that period was pretty painful because I had what I was supposed to be having and it looked good in the outside, but inside I was dying and bored, really bored.
Did you feel like a lot of it was really well captured in the movie Office Space? Like, the ridiculousness of having to turn in these reports that are just redundant. And, the boss is like, well, you're going to come in on Saturday, right? That it's just kind of like going, oh my God, what am I doing here? This is life, just so I can buy some stuff.
Buy stuff that I don't even know if I want. And following rules and trying to, climb the corporate ladder. And I didn't even want to climb the corporate ladder. Why would I do that? But that's what everybody's doing. So you push yourself to do something that you don't want to do. So it's one of the many things I went through in my early 20s, like most 20-year-olds. It's pretty confusing at that time.
Yeah, and I would say that's really a good insight right there. Is in the West, and at least in the past, probably 30 to 50 years, personal development has been equated to, and identity, it's been equated to your profession. You are what you do, and that's not true whatsoever. And having that mindset and breaking out of that kind of mental prison it's a massive step, and I think it's happening. I would say. I don't know. I'm not a millennial, or somebody that's just coming out of high school. I'd say is probably less strong, just because there's so many different influences on the internet that's available that didn't exist when we were in high school. But still, there's that perspective or that push from culture, family members, society, where it's like you got to go to college, you've got to become a professional of some sort, and we're seeing the economy, it's a complex concept in and of itself, but just that people are quickly drawing the connection between, going hundreds of thousands of dollars into debt to pay for a university. The average university in the U.S., I think, costs around $30,000 to $40,000 a year. So 4 to 5 years of that, and you're $100,000 in debt, and then you go get a job if you can find a job, and it might pay you $30,000 a year. It's like going, well, I'm starting out negative already, and there's no real job, certainty. There's no guarantees that you're going to have a job, and it's kind of like this quick downward slope. I remember the first thing that happened when I was in university, my freshman year. As soon as I got student loans, I started to get credit card offers. Mm-hmm. So it was just like you get debt upon debt upon debt, and you become this debt slave, and that's really one of the challenges out there. So I'm going to back up quite a bit, and there was a process that I went through, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I struggled socially. I grew up a very introverted child, and I think that there were probably family kind of circumstances that played into that. I grew up also in a very remote area, and I remember having a lot of home anxiety or homesickness when I went to first grade, and so that just caused a lot of negative or non-beneficial triggers to be created about going places that I'd be by myself. And I also found myself caught between not trusting the teachers, but then not trusting my parents to provide for me at a very young age, which was really detrimental in some areas. And at the same time, I think the person that's watching this, and what I hope to relay over the podcast and through my material is often those painful moments, those what we believe to be defining moments, or the things that wound us, they actually become our greatest strengths. Mm-hmm. To heal, you have to process through those, and it actually gives you more flexibility if you can convert that energy. And so it's a really beautiful alchemical process per se, but it's that process of starting to look at it and go, okay, all the stuff that happened to me, I can perceive it as bad, as negative, as limiting, or I could just as easily turn it and go, okay, in kind of like an Aikido martial arts way, use its energy to move in a different direction or move towards what I want to experience. And so I grew up in a very religious background. It was Catholic, which became Baptist, which became evangelical Christian, and like crazy. Can we swear on this podcast? Have we decided we
Sure. I think so.
Crazy.
Go ahead.
So it was just crazy, the things that I experienced. But at the same time, I mean, we're talking about, like, I don't know if people here are familiar with evangelical Christianity, but there's some strange stuff out there, like, demonic possessions and just, I don't know if it's a psychological. I haven't made up my mind on this. I think it's, possibly psychological. I believe it's possibly spiritual. I'm open to the possibilities, but just watching and hearing strange stories and seeing things. And you could look at this from the perspective of like, oh, these are really simple people or the basic people. Well, maybe, but maybe not. I don't know. I don't have any real definitive answer in terms of that. I find it very fascinating, but just having this experience where I was immersed into an extreme form of spirituality at a young age. It was really packaged as a dogmatic religion, but there were spiritual elements there. And so having that spiritual interest, almost a necessity, it was like you had to develop yourself spiritually just to survive in that kind of environment. There were no other options. But then living within that environment, the dogmatic religion, there were so many rules or regulations or shoulds that had to be followed. It was very restrictive. So what I found is that things that could help you to become a disciplined person or a empowered person spiritually were there. Things that would help you in the real world to become an effective functioning person were not there. And so it was like one area of my life was overemphasized, the other area was not. And at that time I also found I was my early years, so 6 to 10 approximately. I started reading books like The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, and then J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, which really was, they were not actually allowed, but it was something that would sneak at that time because there was this terrible fear of Dungeons and Dragons and, witchcraft and magic and all of that kind of stuff where, you look at it as just a different form of a spiritual belief system, right or wrong, it is what it is. But those were the things that really appealed to me, but they were forbidden. It was kind of like that forbidden fruit. And so, I went through high school and I was just kind of going through the passes where the motions where I was like, a good kid that would go to church, and I tried to play sports and I tried to get good grades, and, I didn't really party, actually never partied in high school. And, there was no drugs, there's no alcohol. And that continued until I was probably in my mid-20s. And actually a little bit before that, I had a kind of a heartbreaking kind of moment where it was really defining. I tried to go to a private university because I was doing the best that I could. And one of the major emphases was, you got to graduate and you've got to become a professional. And I thought, well, I want to earn money because I grew up pretty poor. And I was like, I want to earn money and I want to help people. So what can I do? I'm going to be a doctor. But I was terrible at sciences and mathematics. And not to say that in hindsight, I look at it like this, I have the belief now that I can learn, and anybody can learn anything if they're given enough time. And in that learning environment, the university environment, I did not have the time, and I also didn't have the internal resources to understand how to learn effectively. There's nobody that ever taught me, here's how you learn. It's just like, well, learning is this process. It's like, no, it's actually, it's a sequence, it's something that a person can actually learn how to do. You can learn how to become better at it and master certain areas, but that wasn't available at that time. And so what happened is I ended up failing my first chemistry exam in the first semester. And and this was a private university. It was costing almost $30,000 a year. And, I got grants and, loans and everything, like that. So it wasn't quite as expensive, but it was still expensive. I remember that my parents were having to pay, I don't know, probably around close to $1,000 a month, which was a big step for them. And, I saw my dad's face the first semester when I had to buy books. I ended up spending like $700 on textbooks. My dad's like this, like his eyes were like, oh my God. And that's really normal in the USA. I'm guessing, it's even more expensive now. And to fail that first exam and to have my guidance counselor, or I don't know what they were called at that time, my counselor, I guess, pull me aside. He was also my chemistry professor. And he's like, look, you just failed your first chemistry exam and you're on the pre-medicine route. You can't do that. It's like you're competing with like the best of the best. Like everybody here that's on that same track, they all aced the exam. They got perfect scores, and you failed it. Like what happened? So I don't know. I didn't know how to study for it. I didn't know. I had no clue. And it was that moment of awakening after that first semester where I quickly realized that I didn't have what it took to be on the pre-medicine path. And that was a massive setback. It was kind of like going, wow, okay, I was trying to identify myself as like, somebody that's going to be a medical doctor. And I couldn't even get through the first semester of chemistry 101. And so that was a pretty massive upset. And it caused me to do a lot of soul searching about, where am I going? And then there were some other successive decisions, that I made, and they included going to studying anthropology and archaeology for a while, and then becoming disheartened with that, and then also studying at a seminary, an evangelical Christian seminary, for a year. And that's where I eventually just called bullshit on Christianity, and I stepped away from my faith, which was a really challenging experience. And I think that's really my heart. Like if somebody could understand where I'm coming from, it's like, looking back 20 years and going, to understand that kind of fear, and that's the fear that anybody that comes out of a dogmatic religion has to face. You have to overcome that one fear, and that is the fear of eternal damnation. And I don't think it's, apostasy it's known in Islam, it's known in Christianity, and it's something that, those groups were not very forgiving of. At certain points in time, you couldn't step away from Christianity, and you can't do that in certain areas where they practice Islam today. And so it's a massive fear. Not only are you faced with current physical danger to your body, you're also facing that eternal damnation. Like, you're going, okay, I just stepped away from this religion and supposedly I'm going to hell now.
Can I say something right there? As you're speaking, I was also raised in a Christian family. Wasn't as dogmatic, maybe as your family, but what I've seen is that the same thing that you're describing, people feel it with their jobs these days. Maybe they're not going to have, I'm going to go to hell if I quit my job, or if I quit this life that is not authentic at all. But the same amount of fear probably that I'm sensing that you were having at that moment, or the religion and society has infused in us. I know that a lot of people have had it. I had it in my life where it's like, it would be so bad if I make a decision that honors my soul, that honors my truth. And I know many people come to me and they say, I just really don't know what to do. I know this is not what I want. I still trying to figure out what I want, but stepping away from that system, from that belief system that says you must follow this, in your case, this religion, you must follow, you must stay in your job because you have to pay your bills, because you have kids, because all of these things. So I feel like people are facing these awakening moments, but there's almost like a paralysis there because they're overanalyzing the reasons why they shouldn't leave. And And I think it's a form of slavery. So what
Oh.
would you say it was for you, the quality that, that made you say, you know what, no more of this. I'm going to start searching in a different path.
Mhm. Ooh, that's a tough question. I would say that it was circumstantial, where it was in hindsight, I would call it synchronicity, but at that time I didn't understand what that word meant, and that's something that we're going to talk about in a future podcast, I'm sure, because
Mm-hmm.
it's something that really ties into the work of Carl Jung, which is the psychologist that's probably influenced Paola and I the most, at least me, tremendously with his work. And so the synchronetic event or series of events was um, literally feeling pushed out of the Bible school, the seminary, for asking questions. And it was like, questions are not allowed here. Like, this is the way it is. It's top down. And, we're saying that this is what we believe. This is our translation of what the Bible says. And it actually got to the point that there were philosophical conflicts that I had with certain teachers. And it got to the point where a couple of events escalated, and I I had to meet with the dean. And it was something where I felt like if it was such a big ordeal, that the dean should approach me and say, there's a problem here. And it was literally, being the person in the classroom that raises his hand, and kind of like the kid in Sunday school that goes, yeah, but what happened to the dinosaurs? And the teacher kind of looks at you like, I'm not ready for that question. I'm not prepared for it. And there were so many different examples of that. I don't even want to go down that route. But what I found is just like the door was closing. And I've experienced that multiple times in my life. I think it's something that people experience quite often in jobs or relationships, where you feel like you have to be true to yourself. And it's that point where you stand up for yourself and your own integrity, and you have to let go of the relationship. You have to let go of the job. You have to let go of something, and you just trust that when the door closes, the window opens, and you got to jump out that window. And that's the best way I could describe it.
Yeah. What I'm seeing and what I'm catching here, and I felt this, and that's how I manifest synchronicity in my life, is through a lot, first, curiosity, being curious enough to question the status quo.
Yeah.
When I'm feeling discomfort, to be like, wait a minute, what's going on here? How am I perceiving all of this? And you start question. And after you start questioning, the curiosity starts turning into possibility. And then you start seeking. And we were talking before, and I say, I love to speak to seekers, to people that really want to find answers, to try ways. And when you start seeking, there is a quote of a book that I read that said, when you start saying yes to the universe, or yes to the calling, in a moment we're going to talk about the hero's journey. When you say yes to the call, then the universe says yes back to you. Okay, you're going to say yes, well, let me open some doors where there were no doors before, because you started the motion of saying, I am done with this. And so when people come to me and they get desperate, they're like, I don't know, I'm stuck, I can't leave this way because I have to be here. I always say, start being curious. First, start being curious, but start questioning yourself and start telling yourself the truth.
Yeah.
Very quietly first. And just start being very honest with yourself, and then start seeking ways, watching podcasts, doing things like this, and then ways will open. Doors will open where doors weren't open before. That's what Joseph Campbell talks about too, when you say yes to the call. So, all right. So after you said no to all of those things, what happened?
It was the curiosity process, and it wasn't like anything was resolved overnight. And I think that's one of the biggest distinctions that probably Paola and I would like to make. At least I would like to make it, is people. I believe in miracles, Miracles are the unexpected happening in
Yeah.
undefinable ways. Like we couldn't plan it or prepare for it. It just something happens and it's miraculous, to define a word using itself. But at the same time, it's like with personal development and any kind of inner work, self-actualization, there are active things that you can do. You can work with it, you can struggle with it, you can work on it, you can create habits. And there are also things that will happen in the blink of an eye. There'll be like transformations that just like the chip changes, like, you know, the switch gets flipped and it's just something happens. And I think that those, for the person that starts to go down this path, those synchronicities or those events or those transformations, they probably happen. I would say that they're almost like front loaded. Like you get a bunch of big ones. You're like, wow, this is huge. Like this is all changing and my perspective's different. And then you get faced with the reality. It's like going to, you know, like that transformational workshop. You get all pumped out and then you come out of it like 2 weeks later, you're like, well, yeah, I'm back to life now. And it's just kind of like, this is the way it is. Well,
Yep.
that's the next phase. And so it's like you're going to go through constant peaks and valleys, peaks and valleys. And
Yeah.
I'd say that later on your path, you get hit with more profound, deeper. And Paola's a surfer. It's kind of like there's like the little waves that have like, you know, this quick burst of energy. And then there's those huge waves that just like, boom, take you to that next level. And I think that's what you'll experience. And those are the unexpected ones. That's when you think you got all your shit figured out and you get hit by that big wave. And you're like, oh, okay, I get to put this in action. One of the things that I wanted to share, do you want to talk about the hero's journey right now, the call?
Yeah. Let's talk about the call. Yeah.
Let's talk about the call, and then you go ahead and talk a little bit, and then I wanted to share some really old the 10 ox herding images.
Yeah. Well, what I know about the call, for what I've heard from Joseph Campbell, is that we are all in our own hero's journey. We like to think about the hero. Okay, that was Jesus, that was Buddha, that was Krishna, that, you know, those big, you know, personalities or whatever you want to call it, those big people that everybody follows. But in reality, and someone said the other day, and I really liked it, how in the Christian tradition, we vow or we pray to the God in the heavens, and in the Eastern traditions they bow to the God within you. So, you know, there is a Jesus, there's a Buddha, there's a Krishna within us, there's that hero within us, all of us. It's just that we've been taught that the hero is another person. But in this path of the hero's journey, you find out that life calls you different moments in your life, and usually calls you through crisis, where everything that you knew to be true, everything that, you know, was all organized and you thought, you know, this is my life, this is how it's supposed to be, all of a sudden a big tsunami takes it away. It's that process of crucifixion, and then you have to go through a rebirth. And then when you're going through that process, you say, well, something's got to give here, something's got to change. And you have two options. You can ignore it for a long time. I know in my life I've been great at that. Not anymore. I used to be. But I used to be so good at not wanting to pick up the phone because it was so scary. What are they going to think of me? I'm going to die. I'm not going to be supported. This is ridiculous. And I'm really ignoring my inner voice. But when the calling is just so appealing, it's just inner voice starts screaming at you, and then you start knocking on doors that you're not supposed to be knocking on doors, and they're not opening, or they're open a little bit, they slams on your face, and you're like, oh, why is this happening? But it's because we're not listening. But when you start that process of curiosity, of listening, and also questioning what I just talked about, then you start saying yes to the call. And the call most of the time is very, very scary because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know the path. The call, when you say yes to it, is filled with uncertainty. And again, you have two options. You have the option of to hate the uncertainty and be complaining about how uncertain it is, or to be friends with the uncertainty and be like, okay, Uncertainty is just another evidence that I'm following my path. And Joseph Campbell says, if you can see the whole map, be sure that that's not your map. It's someone else's map. Because if you're in your own hero's journey, if you said yes to the call, sometimes the only thing you're going to see is the next step. And the next step is the next step. And here's where you start trusting and you start analyzing your own psychology. Like for me, it's been when I say yes to my call, it's very uncertainty, and then all of these insecurities come to the surface, and here's where I get to grow. All of these demons or dragons that also Joseph Campbell talks about in the path, in the hero's journey, it's my own programming, right? All of those beliefs that I acquired from my ancestors and my family and my society. So they all come to the surface, and I have to clean the house, or I have to integrate them, because hopefully we'll talk about this in other podcasts. But one of the things, and I learned this from you, is to integrate everything. It's not like I'm all separated. You bring the darkness and the light and all of it, and you know that you're all of it. And so, and then you start conquering yourself, and it feels amazing. Everybody goes, later, oh my God, you're so brave. And it's great to share your story, but it's in the midst of it. It's not the outcome that makes you a hero. It's the path. It's what you have to go through. When some days you feel super excited, and some other days, limiting beliefs saying you're not enough, quit everything, go back to what you know to be real, comes in. That is the real, when it gets real. So that's what I know about the call. It's scary, it's uncertain, and it could be exciting, but it requires a great deal of courage and trust.
Yeah. No, I love it. Anytime Joseph Campbell comes up, I see him as such an inspirational person that, probably didn't receive the merits that, were due to him during his lifetime. But there was one of the terms that has been associated with him. I think there was actually a book written. It was titled this, or I think it was called Maverick, an autobiography of Joseph Campbell, or a biography. I don't recall, but it was something about that. And Maverick was in the title. And Maverick is the term that was used, at least in the U.S. It was kind of referred to. Cowboys were referred to this as like the person that would go off on their own path and they'd explore, and there was no real. They seem to have no real direction from somebody looking at the outside, looking in on their lives, but they had their own way of exploring and understanding the world and integrating things. And I think if I would say my life and the life that I've tried to model is not to follow Joseph Campbell's path, but to follow his attitude and being that maverick and being willing to explore. And there's part of that where he so brilliantly laid it out in the Hero with 1,000 Faces and the call to action, or the call to the hero's journey. It is that process of just going, okay, I give in. Like I can't think of the word, but
surrender.
Yeah, I surrender. It's like I surrender in the sense that I am powerless. And what's really fascinating too, when I studied his work, it was the takeaway that I had is that the call happens, and each time you're called to take action or to surrender in a certain situation or specific context, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, and then it stops. Mm-hmm. And it's like the moment passed. And that scared me more than anything. It was like going, if I don't go down this path, because this is what I feel called to do, then what happens if that moment passes? If the moment passes and I haven't taken action now, or I haven't surrendered? And what's really fascinating is in the first 3 parts of the hero's journey, in the first part, the second phase is that somebody comes in to intervene. And so that's one thing that you can always trust with your path. And that might be why you're watching this right now, is somebody comes in, you get like a godsend or a messenger, or somebody comes in at the right time, the opportune time, to give you the resources that you need in order to make it to that next phase, the next level. And I really see that that's what we're doing. I wanted to share two models while we're talking about models or paths. And they're not to say that this is what you should follow, but they're just a blueprint. And it's kind of like getting your bearing. I talked about this the other day in a different podcast with an NLP trainer that I had studied under. And we were talking about goal setting. And he was telling me, I don't really like goals, because what happens is anytime you reach a goal, you achieve a goal, it changes, because you've had to become a different person in order to achieve that goal. If it's a worthy goal, if it's a big enough goal, you have to evolve, you have to change, you have to develop yourself in order to achieve it. And what changes at that point, by the time you reach that goal, or you reach the person that is capable of achieving that goal, your desires most likely have changed also. Mm. And it's like one of the things where you see that with people that do weight loss or some sort of extreme makeover or something like that. They change, and then they get this outcome, and then they possibly lose it, or sometimes they can use it to rebound or to go higher off into a different area. But it usually never means what they thought it would mean. Mm-hmm. And so one way, an effective way to use goals, is as a mile marker, or like a road sign that says you're on the right path, but it's not the end.
Right.
You're going to be a different person by the time you get to that goal, or you get close to it. And it's probably going to evolve. It's going to change, because you're going to have more information.
Mm-hmm. So you were talking about blueprints.
Yeah, I'm going to pull this up right now. So this is a map that I believe that we use, and it's just an example. It doesn't mean this is actually what's happening, but we have a paradigm. So our paradigm is like this red line that happens here. This is what you believe to be true based upon your culture, your upbringing, your experiences, your education, your intelligence level, everything. And within this paradigm, you've got your reality, and your identity is comprised of your experiences in the realms of health, wealth, relationships, and spirituality, your human needs, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the social norms, the expectations that your society or your culture has for you, the significant emotional events, how those impacted your values and your beliefs. And those are all stored in your unconscious mind. So for example, I could ask you, what was the best birthday party that you had, that you remember when you were, under the age of 15? Mm-hmm. Or maybe in Latin America, probably 15 was a big birthday party, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It was, yes.
So that was probably a big one. But it's not like you were thinking about that, but that information was there in your unconscious mind. And mm-hmm. So we have that, we have this depths, the storehouse of all of our life experiences that are being stored in our unconscious mind. Mm-hmm. And those make up our identity. So our identity for the average person is something that occurs in retrospect. So looking back, there's a sequence of events that made me who I am today. I say that the most effective people, and what I strive to do, is look forward and go, what would the person that I want to be do? Instead of what has the person that I am been doing, if that makes sense.
I love that question. Can we pause there for a moment? So to ask ourselves, what would the person that I would like to be would do in this moment, as a way of bringing that future best version of you to advise the current reality. Yeah. I love that. And I've been, sorry for interrupting, but I've been listening to a lot of Joe Dispenza. And he says we're constantly creating from the past. We keep creating the same situations over and over again, because our brain, the only data that our brain looks for is what's been happening, was the evidence of the past. So that's why we need to turn into someone else, he calls it, rewire our brain and ask different questions. And I just love that question. And for everyone that is watching, what would your next version of yourself, the self that you want to create, would do in this moment. I think that's brilliant.
So let's make that the assignment, the action step for today. So anything that you want to choose, one specific thing in your life that you want to change.
Mm-hmm.
And then what identity would you have to make that an effortless change? Just part of your identity. So it could be your health, it could be your relationships, it could be your finances, your wealth, it could be your spirituality. But if you were to be how would you have to be different? Let's put it that way. How would your identity have to be different in order to make that an effortless, integral part of your being? And so let's continue really quickly. And so I think that what we're constantly doing is, and this is like the challenge of consumerism, perhaps, and it's also the blessing or the gift of consumerism, or being in a world or an economy where we have choices, is we get to think about our ideal lifestyle, the ideal experiences, the ideal emotions. And often for most people, those are so illusory, they're not very defined. It's just kind of like this wishful thinking. Like, I'd love to go on this vacation, or I'd love to live in this location, or I'd like to, have this kind of girlfriend or boyfriend or husband or wife, or this kind of family, or, whatever it is, or I'd like to feel these emotions. But we haven't charted that path on how to get there. And I believe it comes into, it happens by healing your significant emotional events. So you heal your past, you figure out how to integrate what was once perceived as limiting events, and integrate those, or use the alchemical process and turn those into empowering events, reframing them. And then also using your values and your beliefs, asking different questions, asking high quality questions about what you believe and what you value, so that you're pushed and pulled in the direction of your ideal experiences. And I believe that for most of us, what we want, and this is my perspective, obviously, but I believe that what we want is, we want to have a primary life purpose. We want a calling. We want something that we can throw ourselves into, something that consumes us, something that dedicates us. And for every single person, it's different. Mm-hmm. But I think that there is that desire to create and to experience, and it might happen on a biological level. Somebody, for one person, it might be the desire to have a family and to be an excellent parent. For others, it might be the desire to create with art. For others, it might be entrepreneurship or industry. And I believe that all of those things can mix together, but it's something that's unique. And I also believe that your past, the wounds of the past, the limiting experiences, or the perceived limiting experiences, the challenges that you went through, are the perfect combination of chaos, limiting events that force you to grow or to change or to develop strengths. Because what happens is, anytime we have a weakness, we compensate. So we use that compensation, and we develop some sort of strength out of that compensation. And so, but I believe that we take that content, and that can all be funneled into the right direction of a primary life purpose. And what I want to share with you guys to leave you with, and I think that we're probably coming close to our time here. We're probably a little bit over our time, but it's the 10 oxherding wood prints. And these are probably, go ahead.
I just wanted to make sure that we put this together we were talking about the calling, and then you went into the values and the identity. So how does that play into the calling?
Ooh, that's podcast number 13, I think. No, but we'll definitely get into that. I mean, that's a podcast in and of itself.
But if you can say just one sentence of that, like you just went into this whole explanation about the identity and the values and healing the past. So you would say that when we have said yes to the calling, we need to make sure that we're taking care of all of this areas, your values.
Yeah, absolutely. So where you experience leakages of energy, psychic energy or emotional energy, it's where you have values incongruence. And so what if you say yes to the calling and you don't put parameters on it, the calling could consume you, or you find that you spend your energy in ways that aren't beneficial. So, and I would also say that, you know, one of the things that I've noticed is that we're moving further and further away from the philosophical traditions and understanding that that great civilizations like Greece and Rome were based upon. And anytime you saw them fall away from their own principles, they collapse. And so there's, not to say that those were perfect civilizations, but there were thousands of years of philosophical reasoning and insights that arose out of those civilizations and the great thinkers. And I think that that's where, you know, you have your values, but then the bedrock that those values are placed upon are the principles. And the principles are concrete. It's like those are the things that frame your life, or the way that you choose to behave and operate. It's kind of like the operating system in a way.
Yeah. So in other words, we become this, like we're like playing, what is the name of the guy? This guy, the Gadget, the investigator Gadget. What was his name? It was a cartoon.
Inspector Gadget.
Inspector Gadget, like with our own minds. And this is the personal development path. You become so curious about yourself. And going back to Joseph Campbell, he said the biggest privilege of this lifetime is to know thyself, to know yourself. And yeah, I know we're going to make more podcasts about, you know, getting into all of these things. But as episode number 1, we're talking about the calling, when we say yes to the call, but also it requires that we go into a quest within, you know, and just understand how all of these things work, so that we can navigate it more gracefully. So we're not just fighting against the current, we're not fighting against ourselves, I would say. So you wanted to show some pictures? Yeah,
just one last thing, and this, you know, totally ties into what we were talking about here. So these are wood prints from approximately 2,000 years ago from China, and they're based upon the spiritual path, or, you know, the path to spiritual enlightenment. And I think that there are some. They're not exactly the same thing, but they're very similar to the personal development path. And what I find fascinating is they travel a similar journey, like a parallel journey. So in this first image here, and, you know, remember, these are a couple thousand years old, and they were carved into wood. And so they dipped these into ink and then put them onto probably not papyrus, but some sort of cloth or paper at that time. So you have this guy here, and he's just going through his daily life, and it looks like he's a hunter of a sort. I think he had a bow there or some sort of thing. And then one day he sees this ox, or this bull, and he sees like the tail part of it, and he'd never really considered it. And so it puts him on this path, this like curiosity, and starts to look for the footprints. And then he finally encounters this animal, and he struggles with it. And then he tames the animal, and then he learns how to dominate the animal. He creates mastery. And one of the things, you know, we're looking at this now is like, okay, this is a cow, like, you know, big effing deal. Well, go back. That was food. That was transportation. That was power to cultivate fields. So it was like literally the thing that would make a civilization occur. And at the same time, it's also a metaphor for one's animal nature, one's animal self. And so this individual, by cultivating the relationship with this animal, not only is he able to create physical, security or stability, but he's also finding himself, and he's creating that internal stability and security. And then there's this empty circle here, and the analogy is that the man or the person and the ox become one, and then there's harmony. And then using this knowledge, the individual is able to go back to the marketplace with his creations and to share it with others. And I see that that's the same thing with personal development. I will venture a guess that anybody that starts on the personal development path will soon find the calling of the entrepreneurial spirit. And that could have something that happens in a way that you'd probably never considered. You know, there are people that could do it like directly through, you know, coaching is tremendously popular nowadays, but music, art, industries, whatever it is, I believe that once you go down this path, you're going to find that personal development is professional development, and that it gives you a higher degree of ability to communicate with other people, to understand the insecurities, the fears, the hesitations that, you know, your clients or prospects might have, to be able to rationalize those or to help them work through those kind of hangups. And so, you know, if I were to go back and I have marketing and advertising management degrees for my undergrad, those are things that I could have learned honestly on the internet. In today's day and age, you can learn everything that I learned in 4 years or 5 years of undergrad, probably like 2 months on the internet, just knowing where to look. But what really pays, what will really get you the job or make you an effective entrepreneur is your own self-actualization, your own self-awareness, your own personal development, and having that degree of confidence and certainty in who you are, because it's just your ability to manage chaos, uncertainty, and change. And those are the constants in life.
I love that. I love that part where in the pictures where he becomes one. And for me, I see it as when, okay, you've encountered the calling, you're learning how to, you know, learning new concepts, how to know yourself, how to, you know, look in your past and see those childhood wounds, and then you're starting to discover your talents, and all of these things that the personal development path brings to you is an information. And then we get into our frontal cortex, the brain receives the information, but then you have to integrate it into your body, into your beingness. Not so much I just know it. It's like you have to tame it first, because the body and the subconscious mind are going to be like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to, like, you know, be soul searching sometimes, or I don't feel like doing that today. So that kind of like the self-sabotage, you have to go through those processes where you're like, you don't feel like doing it, but I'm going to do it anyway. And so you develop the discipline and the habits. And then one day, all of these things, they're just you become one with all of it. And then as you're becoming one with all of this knowledge that you're acquiring about yourself and the world, then you can give so much more to the world. You can bring it back to everyone. And that's why we see sometimes some people who are like, oh, so much in admiration of them. But what we forget sometimes, they've gone through all of that, and they've done the work, the chopping wood and the carrying water before and after enlightenment. So yeah, thank you for that. And for the people that couldn't see the images, maybe we can put it in the podcast notes so they can see it. Maybe they can Google it. How do they call this?
The ox herding wood prints.
Okay.
And the personal development path is on my website, so they can search it for there. So I think we should wrap this up for today, and really want to thank you for listening. We've got so many other concepts and ideas that we want to share with you, and I think we should do a moment of promotion. So both Paola and I are coaches, and we also have products and programs that we would like to share with you. Please support us. You know, this is how we can continue to add value to your lives and to share these insights with you. So Paola, what would you like to promote? Your book, your coaching services? Tell us a little bit more about both.
Well, I'm in the process of creating online courses. So very soon on my website, there's going to be my first online course, which is a 4-week boot camp. And yes, so I would say another way too is by liking this video and sharing it too, so the more people can know about this. And, you know, if they want more assistance and guidance, they can contact us directly, and we can I can definitely offer my coaching services.
Perfect. Yeah, definitely get Paola's book free, or if you speak Spanish, libre, and then contact Paola for coaching, and then you can also contact me for coaching. And I have a new app that's on Android and iTunes called the Attention Shifting app. and it's got hours of content. There's probably around 170 programs there, including my Men Living with Meaning and Empowered Muse, 2 different programs, personal development programs for men and women. So thank you very much for your time. Hope you've enjoyed it. And yeah, definitely share this video.
Yeah. See you in the next episode. Bye.
All right. Take care.